Welcome to class again, Communicating at Work or Organizational Communication. Chapter 8 is on tap for today, and it's about teams and networks. Chapter 8 is also probably the longest chapter in the book and has the most information in it that I think is most directly relevant to our communication that happens at work today. You know, we've talked about classical management and this one-way flow of information that happens in a totally classically managed organization, and some of you have written about that in our first essay. And how we have been evolving towards systems theory type management that recognizes various parts and components within an organization made up of living people rather than a well-oiled machine. And that's a healthier way to look at organizations, and it's within that systems theory that this chapter emerges here. We'll return to that idea in a little bit because we've got some problems with teams and networks really establishing themselves in the organizational world out there. Okay, here we have a picture of a whole bunch of people in a raft going down some rapids, a Colorado River maybe. And everybody's got to row according to whoever's shouting out the orders, and it's, you know, one of these organizational team building retreats or outdoor things that people do, and it's interesting. A lot of organizations really do this and take their employees out and pay for a weekend at a outdoor center someplace where they have to rely on each other to get tasks done, and whether you're on a boat like this or at some place where they have tight ropes and you have to balance against somebody else and work your way across two different ropes while you lean on somebody else's hands, or whatever team building exercises they have, they're all metaphors for how organizations want you to work together with teams. Now, they're really expensive to fund a trip like this, so this is part of why it's having trouble getting established in the workplace. But these metaphors, I think, are fairly accurate, and we are social beings as humans. You know, the person who likes to be isolated and work alone and not be part of a team is the unusual person in organizations, and the unusual person in society, we call them the, there's that psychological word for that person. Oh, well, they're reclusive, they'd rather be alone. My son is kind of that way. For one reason or another, and he prefers to work the night shift where he doesn't have to deal with people. Well, you know, most of us are not like that. Most of us enjoy human interaction and don't want to be isolated, don't want to be a loner. And so working in teams comes very natural to us, and even in very classically managed organizations, you get groups of people that do work together as teams, and most organizations are developing that to one degree or another. Okay, the chapter starts off though with a quick idea about democracy in the workplace. And if I recall from a prior version of the book, there was an entire chapter devoted to this, and they just give a few pages of it, but I wanted to talk about a couple of these ideas. Really what we're talking about, and this does lead into teamwork, and this is the theoretical idea behind it, is a centralized decision making versus decisions made by multiple stakeholders or groups of people or a member from various units within an organization making the decisions. Who makes the decision? The classical management perspective would say those people at the top and their managers who are assigned underneath them in that hierarchy. They make the decisions, they order the decisions down, and everybody follows those decisions. Then you run into a problem of when people aren't conforming to the rules or decisions, you have to police them, versus this idea of democracy in the workplace where decisions made by the group that's lower down, even if you do have a boss kind of looking over their shoulder, those decisions become enforced by the members of the group themselves. And you know, I don't know that there's debate here over which way is better. It's just getting these bosses to loosen up a bit and begin incorporating this. It seems to be the greater challenge. A couple of the ideas here. One is term constitutive co-determination. Now think of this word of constitutive as like our constitution, where we establish something, and we have literally a document we've created in some kind of constitution, whether it's for your Boy Scouts or the United States or any organization or group you belong to. This constitution is that written document that establishes the group and determines the rules. So something that's constitutive is that practice of putting this into action. So constitutive co-determination means you and I and others are working together to establish the kind of workplace here that we are going to function in. And so this is, in essence, that democracy in the workplace idea. Employee engagement is a very critical aspect of this, because when people are engaged, they're fully involved and enthusiastic about their work, and that is the hope of systems theory and of this idea of democracy in the workplace. And the profit line for corporations and organizations in general is that if you can get people fully engaged like this, fully involved, the pride of work is there, not being lazy. They police each other about being lazy. In fact, people won't even do it. People work hard. Though it does require a share in the rewards, perhaps, being well paid, feeling very satisfied with what you're doing. Organizational leaders that praise people rather than berating them, praise them when they do things well rather than shouting at them when they're not quite doing what you wanted, and then bringing in training programs to help people become better employees. It's just a different way of going at it. Some of you have described really good, healthy workplaces you're in. Others have described pretty tough places to work. So this democracy in the workplace is struggling against the classical management thinking that is still heavily entrenched in American organizations. Less so than it ever has been, but it's still definitely there. Often it really depends on the place where you work to what degree it's there. I'm in an organization, Northern Arizona University, and this team that I work within, our department, this work group, is very democratically run, and we've got a nice little diagram in the book. You know, I didn't bring it up here, but I think I can go right to it. Yeah, if we can see this, it's page 232, and it really shows kind of the ladder of how empowered your team is. And I just highlighted the top two items, disciplinary process and making compensation decision. How do people get punished when they don't do their job as a teacher here? And how much do you get paid? And those are the only two things that seem to be beyond the real control of the director of our school. And I'm not so sure about the employee discipline issue, and perhaps our director just puts that back on faculty. No, it's not really. I've been involved in that somehow on our annual review committees. You know, we know who's doing their job and who's not around here, and who do we discipline? You know, that's turned over to people a little higher up the ladder. And so I'm a little unclear on what they actually do to those one or two faculty members that really aren't doing their job as well as we think they ought to. But really, this is a very democratic organization I work in. Yet, at the same time, our Board of Regents, Arizona Board of Regents, hires a president for the university who hires provosts and other people at the high levels that may come into the position with more of the classical management type mindset. And so we have this conflict. It probably really gets rough right at the dean and provost level, with conflicts about budgets and about what we want to do and what the priorities are. That's a little above our level as teachers, and I'm not exactly sure what goes on at that level, though I hear rumors from time to time with various presidents and chancellors of universities that I've worked at. Okay, so democracy in the workplace is happening, but there are forces at work against it, people that just still want to be in total control. yet they do with unimportant or lesser tasks turn over control below to varying degrees. My former institution, it was controlled top to bottom. Not quite to the point where they told me how to teach my classes, but anything above that, I had very little say in how it's managed. And that's different from here at this university. So each organization is different in regard to this. I'm going to apologize here for a minute. I like my lectures to be a little bit shorter than you know, this one's going to be, and this is really a long chapter with 40 pages here. All right, let's see if I can get my slides to work. Okay, should be team-based organizations. Okay, teams are groups of people with people from a variety of functional areas. Just people right from the little room you work in that are doing the same task aren't a team. We're really defining teams as going a little bit beyond that. So even if you're working at a factory, it's people from 2 different assembly lines, and if you're asked to help solve assembly problems or help us to be more efficient, then you're within a team. But just the people right within doing exactly the same thing you do may not be a team. So here in my department, we have people teaching CST labeled classes, and I'm not sure we are a team so much as just a little work group. But when we work with people from the film or from journalism now, I think we're becoming a team within this, and a lot of our committees can be looked at as teams. This team-based organization also looks at all employees as capable of decision making. And I'm happy to say here at NAU that that does happen, and even our lower tier teachers in the very confusing hierarchy of lecturer, senior lecturer, primary lecturer I think was the word, there's another layer there, assistant professor, associate full professor, assistant professor of practice, associate professor of practice, full professor of practice. Everybody gets to be on the even important committees, such as the review committees looking at how good a job everybody's doing, which I was on in only my 3rd year here at the institution. Okay, the types of teams here, 4 different types. I want to run quickly through these slides. You can read this in the textbook. But a project team, and they work on particular projects, and these teams can even come and go as the projects come and go. A work team is more concerned with an entire work process, and that process could be made up of numerous projects or numerous elements of some sort, but the work team is a little larger than that. A quality improvement team is kind of off to the side. It can certainly be made up of members from the work teams or even the project teams, but these kind of teams evaluate and improve the process. They're trying to, they're the ones that actually probably bring in change, though the work team may suggest it. And then there's this thing called virtual teams, and we are in a globalized world where more and more companies do business not just with other companies around the world, but actually have branches around the world that your different project teams could be anywhere. Even your work teams can be at various places in the world. So these virtual teams are from disparate locations, typically communicating through teleconferencing technology, like not just Skype on your laptop or your whatever, but by Destiny Conferencing is one company that does this, Cisco, and other companies like this that actually have walls of television monitors and cameras to have a meeting with 30 other people on the other side of the world. These virtual teams work together from various places in the world. Okay, the team roles you can have within each team, and these are generic to the various kinds of teams you can have out there. One is a task role, and these are people within your team, and people kind of put themselves into these roles just by the nature of their personality. And these people, and sometimes they can be assigned, but they evaluate and they initiate the progress and ideas. So they kind of keep things moving, evaluating our progress, throwing ideas out there. And maybe they just throw the idea on the table and people discuss it, but they kind of really are making things happen within the team. There are people within your group in maintenance roles, and they help relieve tension, and when people are getting disagreeing and a little upset at each other, these are the people that speak up and say, come on, let's keep our focus on the big picture here. They try to create harmony within the group, and I tend to be one of these people, and I'll speak up and say, you know, your two positions really aren't that far apart. If we look at it, it's just two different ways to solve the same problem. And these kind of people help diffuse any tension that might be there. And we get into a couple of problems here. These self-centered roles, there's always that one or two members that want to dominate, and typically by doing most of the talking and shooting down ideas, praising ideas. They don't necessarily come up with many ideas on their own, but they do dominate a group. Sometimes it'll be a senior member of a group or an employee with seniority who tends to do a lot of the talking. And that doesn't mean they're wrong, especially if they have a lot of experience. But I think they become less self-centered when they speak judiciously, when we can see that there's a impasse or that we're lacking an idea, that person can speak up. This prince role is interesting, and that's that person that just thinks they're brilliant and their idea is always the best one, and they're going to resist any ideas that are not their own. And so those self-centered people and those prince people can be difficult to deal with, and often when they argue, that maintenance person steps in, or maybe even the task person suggests something else. Now, facilitator role, those are the people that remind us, look, we've been here 45 minutes and we have to keep moving here. Let's come back to that problem and we'll try to address it next week, or we'll email some ideas about it. They help us keep to an agenda, and they make sure we reach a consensus. Often this is an assigned role within work groups, within a work group or an employee organization where there's some kind of parliamentary procedure. This person would be the parliamentarian that actually would even disallow talk on certain subjects because it's not on the agenda. Okay, decision-making process using teams. Some interesting ideas here. Number one, teams make better decisions, usually. And more ideas go into it. People think of problems that we're going to run into, people with experience versus creative people. And often somebody within a group may be very decisive and make a suggestion on a solution, and it gets debated. But when you have somebody sitting back making all the decisions in their corner office with the windows, they can think they're right and be totally blind to some aspect of the problem and make a wrong decision, and that happens more often than it should, and teams make better decisions typically than the lone individual. The usually part comes from this problem of groupthink. And groupthink you've probably heard about, where there's just simply a lack of critical evaluation of an idea or a procedure, and people within the group may even be aware of it and think, we got a problem here, but they're afraid to open their mouth because some dominant, self-important prince type person in the group has ridiculed them in the past, or it's clear that the boss wants to go ahead with this, and if you oppose it too much, that message might get back to somebody who can have some decision over your compensation package, or even throw you out of the company. And so people keep their mouths shut, even though they sense we have a problem here. The classic example of this in organizational literature was the Challenger disaster in 1987. You've all seen the images. And literally the problem that caused that spaceship with 7 astronauts on board to explode was discussed in meetings by NASA engineers, and they got overruled by managers who said, we've got to get this thing in the air, and we don't agree with your assessment of the risk. And so groupthink set in, and people were afraid, the engineers were afraid to really oppose the managerial decision within their work group that was looking over the whole process. Conflict within this decision-making process used to be considered counterproductive, and we have to eliminate it. Hence, groupthink could come around because you have managers that are trying to shut down conflict, and conflict isn't necessarily bad. I'm adding in a chapter in the book here about conflict because and this will be the next lecture, number 9. because it is so crucial to at least have some basic understanding of how conflict operates. And the main idea that is in our organizational literature today is we have to collaborate, we have to work together to resolve conflict. Conflict's not a bad thing. Conflict gives us the opportunity to actually have stronger relationships once we've worked through it, and to come up with better ideas, and to get past halfway solutions where we've just compromised to save from having conflict. So it's now viewed as a good thing. Diversity in decision making can bring problems in. We're talking about a diversity of people groups, people from different cultures that are working together, especially in global organizations. And it can cause problems because it's a little more difficult to work through conflict, because actual values can be different from people in different places in the world, such as somebody from a collective culture that wants to work together and solve this problem versus people from an individualistic culture that are kind of looking out for themselves rather than the group. But general methods have been learned that help us get past this, that involve gathering all the info we can, being willing to adapt to the way of thinking of people from the other cultures, or at least be open to it, to recognize and value this social cohesion, the sticking together of people in social groups, and recognize that and embrace that and make that part of your work team even, and also just focusing on the long-term mutual goals we have within a corporation or organization that we all want to make a living. That helps us back up and say, we better keep collaborating to get past this conflict we're having. All right, there's been a retreat from teams somewhat, and I've sensed it as I've taught this class over the years, as we've gotten into this recession that we started in 2008. And I'm seeing this latest edition of the book now is recognizing that as well. And what I see, and it's not really stated directly in the book, but my take on it has been that teamwork was a great thing during good times. And we had the extra money in an organization to pay for these retreats where we work on teamwork skills. Today, though, with really declining budgets in a lot of areas, the problem has been that CEO types, people, managers, these leaders that are ultimately responsible, that within organizations that still have that underlying classically managed structure but have just been open to the idea of teams and begin to incorporate them, they want to make quick decisions. They want to make decisions that they know are guaranteed, and so we're kind of backtracking and sliding back into more classically managed organizations where people at the top make the decisions and they want the well-oiled machine, and the human relations approach about valuing your contributions, your ideas, and we believe you're able to make decisions, kind of backing away from that a little bit in a lot of organizations. I've seen that in the universities where the budget gets tight and the people at the top grab onto it and just kind of change the rules about how decisions are made around the organization. Okay, so teams do get stuck with problems for various reasons, and we've talked about a couple of those already. And this idea of positive collaboration, this helps us to get unstuck. If we can collaborate positively and not argue and debate and have to win just to protect my interests, to make it look like I need to speak up within the group to hold my position as one of the senior members of the group. No, we've got to focus on mutual goals. And this should even be able to help with this retreat if people at the top of organizations who are ultimately responsible will recognize that we can have mutual goals. Nobody wants to get laid off because your company has lost part of its market share due to competition or a pullback in the economy. All right, let's move over and talk more about networks in the second half of the chapter now. You get this traditional organization chart here coming right out of classical management. And then you have this informal network map right here that shows this is how things really are organized. It's kind of like this director up at the top sits at the desk and draws this beautifully organized chart and said, this is the way it works. But really, if you stood back and said 10 years down the road, after trying to follow this blueprint, here's what actually came out of it, something that looks a little more like this. And I think this video I've got you watching by Manuel Lima does a wonderful job at describing the process that leads to this, and that this is a much more natural way for humans to interact with one another. And this really does fit systems theory. And it's not that we've decided in 1900 classical management is the way to go, and we changed our minds about 1987 or so and said, well, no, we're going with systems theory now, and then pushed it throughout the 90s. It's really probably been a systems type organization all along, but classical management overrides it. But recognizing that you do have a living system is a good way to go. There's still this, and I just see it in organizations there, even where I work today, this versus that. And this whole idea of networking, I think, is much more organic, much more natural, and you're not pushing against our natural tendency of human beings when you recognize that our organizational chart, perhaps it ought to look more like this. And from that perspective, yeah, we can do things to improve it, to tweak it, to oil it, and make it run more efficiently. Because yeah, in organizations there are very mechanical tasks and processes that have to be addressed that way. All right, so networks. We're defining these networks as think of it as the system of interconnections between the members of an organization here. So we have a couple of kinds of networks here. A small group network, and this would be a network, I think, of just 4 to 5 people that interact with each other all the time. I'm in one of those here at the CST Department, Communication Studies, with about 9 other faculty members, and we talk about what we do primarily at our meetings. It don't really, we communicate a little bit outside, but we have a lot of communication amongst ourselves, and unless it goes outside. Now, emergent networks are probably the most enduring in organizations, and these that emerge naturally from the formal and informal communication that goes on. So I used to work at a nuclear power plant and a construction site, and we had our little work team, a small group of 12 people on our crew, but our network expanded beyond that to a crew next to us that did very similar work we had to coordinate with. They pulled in the wires, we had to connect up the wires to devices. And so we had to be in contact with them through the constraints of our organizational paperwork. And at the same time, we had other groups outside of that just emerged naturally, and this is the people that provided everything we needed to get our job done. We had to be in constant communication with them to make sure we have the parts needed to do the job. Okay, the grapevine is an interesting concept, and the book has a nice origination of that. The telegraph wires strung from tree to tree during the Civil War to help the armies communicate were called the grapevine. But within organizations, this is metaphorical, and what it really is this tendency of people, humans, to communicate with one another, especially with interesting or unusual news at an organization. It can get pretty boring, but when the supervisor is having an affair with one of the employees, this is news. These days, it's illegal. It used to just be news and frowned upon. And news like that travels fast. Well, that's a typical grapevine. Yet, there's another aspect of the grapevine that you need to understand, and that is that often very important information travels from person to person within your work group, within various components of the network, and through the whole network itself, very accurately and very quickly. especially now when we've got text messaging on phones and email. Now, that gives a record of it, and maybe that's why I still like to walk around the halls of the department here and just talk to my colleagues. I don't necessarily want a record of everything I think and write on email or on Facebook, and I have a suspicion even those things you regret saying on Facebook that you delete are still on Facebook servers one day. And at your employer, every keystroke you type may be recorded in case there's ever some legal issue and they have to look into what you've been up to. The grapevine is probably more of just that informal communication, but it is accurate and it is fast. And I think I told this story. I had a vice chancellor who really was afraid we were going to have to cut back colleagues, and so he just floated a rumor out there that we may have to lay some people off. Well, 6 or 7 really competent colleagues who were skilled and experienced enough to get a new job very easily left that year, finding new jobs. And that left us with 6 or 7 holes to fill in our faculty. And yeah, we hired new people to come in. Let's see, our vice chancellor was shrewd, and he knew we're hiring in new people at $10,000 less per employee at least than these associate professors who left, who had a good work record and could easily find other work. Or even some of our minority professors who were in high demand at other schools who needed to diversify their faculty. And so we lost valuable people, yet our vice chancellor achieved his goal of trimming the faculty salary budget. And in case he would have had to lay it off, he didn't have to renew the positions to all be searched for and refilled. As it turned out, the budget improved over the next 2 years, and every one of those positions was refilled. But he used the grapevine very shrewdly, and knowing that it was accurate, and he probably really would have laid some people off. And it did happen quickly. People were looking for work the next day and afraid for their jobs. So you can always keep a grain of salt handy for grapevine information, but don't just assume it's rumor. It's often very accurate and very quick. Patterns of interaction within these networks, a couple of key ideas here. Density, and this just refers to the number of, when we say actual links, people that are actually talking to one another versus all of the possible people they could be talking to. I tend to talk mostly to just 3 or 4 different colleagues, and I could be talking to 50 different colleagues. So that's a low density using this equation. The actual links divided by the number of possible links probably gives you a ratio number of point something, 0.75. It'd be pretty high density. A 0.21 would be much lower density because I only talk with 1 out of 5 people that I could talk with. Weak ties. Now this is an interesting concept. I suppose this is versus strong ties, which the book doesn't mention. But the weak ties are people you just don't talk to that much at work. But when you do talk to them, usually you're sharing pretty important information, often different perspectives, new ideas. And we've got the image here of 2 very different people supposedly within an organization. But when you have maybe it's the guy who's the boss in a suit and tie there talking to somebody who works in his jeans, I don't know where he'd work in that particular organization, but that boss may be getting some perspectives he'd never heard about, and looks like they're telling a joke actually. And the guy that in the blue collar clothes may be getting some perspectives from the boss. It'll help his people work more efficiently, whatever. But this would be the weak tie that actually can be very valuable. The strong ties are where we talk all the time, we see each other day, and we typically don't talk about new or real important stuff. These patterns of interaction can also extend out from your organization to your entire industry or your community. So as a professor, I in the past have belonged to the National Communication Association. I read its listserv postings daily, and the annual conferences are out there. There are some regional associations you can belong to as a teacher, and you're keeping those industry ties. What are people teaching? And I can go to the NCA conference and look at 8 different textbooks and stand there and thumb through them, and maybe I'll change my mind about what textbook to use. I go to panels where I learn how to teach various classes taught by the people that wrote the textbook. And I've always found those to be very useful. And I just see my old friends where I used to work and maintain some connections. So this kind of interaction, it'd be weaker ties, and but often you get very good information from those. Okay, some of the roles within the network, and they have 4 different roles that they describe here. Isolates are people that just work alone. Maybe they've been assigned to work alone. My first year here at NAU, for practical reasons, I taught online from Indiana and or from Ohio. We lived on the state line, actually. I could walk to it in 5 minutes. But I worked alone. I think I participated in a handful of conference calls over the whole course of the semester, and that was my only connection with the department, and a few emails. I worked alone every day. I recorded lectures like this. I emailed with students, I assigned my grades, and I talked on the phone with a few people when I needed to. Once I came to campus, I worked a lot more closely with people, but still, professors really do work alone quite a bit. We stay in our offices and don't necessarily team teach that often. Okay, group members would be the next role, and that's where you really are working with a group of people to get a job done. An example of that here in the university is the teaching and learning office here on campus, where there's about 8 people that work there, and their job is to help people like me become better teachers. And I can go up there and meet with 2 or 3 of them at any time who will help me design a syllabus or learn things about how to use this online system. And so they're a real group, and they're group members up there that work together every day, and they know each other very well. Bridge members of a group are these network roles, and this is when you belong to 2 or more groups. And you can be in one group and then learn something important as you meet with another group or work with them. You've got some key information that they may need to know, and I saw some examples of that in our last faculty meeting with a couple of people, members of different groups that were at that meeting. Liaisons are people that don't have a group membership, but they have a lot of contact with people all over. Not quite the same as isolates, not belonging to a group, but they are in connection, and their job, their role depends on multiple contacts with multiple groups. All right, we're getting towards the end here. We are in a digital global society here. We can make connections with people anywhere. The last few years I've been working on some writing projects with a colleague back in Indianapolis, and she and I can talk on Skype. We can email, and we've had a very good working relationship. Yet at the same time, I don't see her regularly, and we go weeks at a time without talking sometimes, and our projects kind of stall out. So it's not always just the wonderful thing you would expect. Internet forums are another way to gain info. You have a problem at work, you can get on an internet forum and get an answer for how to solve it. And the example I've seen just recently was somebody who was part of an IT team that worked for a certain politician, was asked to delete emails by that politician, and that person was in a very high position. And so he got on an internet forum and said, hey, I need to delete this person's name and title from a whole bunch of emails and maybe replace it with something else. And all these emails are stored on the server within our email software, and how do I do that? And other people on the forum gave him a very quick answer. Oh, here's the software you use, and here's the procedure you use to cover up all this dirt you're trying to hide. And the person did that. Of course, now it's all coming out in the news. It was that internet forum, actually, that has put the FBI onto this problem. Okay, so more connectivity does not mean more collaboration. I thought this was an important idea here. Just because we have these cell phones that are online, you can look at web pages, forums, read your email, text people, talk to people anywhere, talk to them with Skype, right on your phone, face to face. It doesn't mean we do that. There's still quite a value in going outside of your office door or stepping around your cubicle and talking to other people you work with. And that's still a very effective means of communication, and obviously a good way to collaborate. The connectivity is wonderful, but it doesn't always mean we use it or that we use it well. I think younger people use it better than somebody my age, and I notice my own kids very connected with people all over, although I'm not sure that their relationships are that deep, or that the trust between them and the other people they're connected to is that deep. But the ability is there, and young people are getting more and more comfortable with it. Okay, the final page. This is just one little paragraph, but since it grabs the title of the textbook, Balancing Creativity and Constraint, and it's that main idea that these authors are really trying to put out there, that we've got to be creative to move forward and solve problems, but we're still surrounded with rules and organizations that we have to adhere to maintain the organization. Some of the problems here. New group members can be very unsure of their roles. Are they isolated in their work that they do? Are they connected in the group? It takes a while to figure out. Back to those team members of the different kind of people, the facilitator, the person who relieves conflict in the group. What role do you have? And it takes a while to fall into those. And so these are some constraints that operate on people that come in. When there's conflict within groups, often about creative ideas or problem solving, it's often the conflict itself becomes heavily laden with the constraints. They kind of rise up in the conflict situation, and people start citing, well, we can't do this because of that, we can't do this because of that. And it tends to hold back creativity, so that's a problem we have to deal with. And these informal networks we have, though, maybe the weak ties, typically have these fewer constraints, but when they become used a lot and very helpful and productively put to work for us, they tend to get formalized in some way, and then they're not quite so informal anymore, and then the constraints creep in and start causing problems. So this balancing that goes on with the creativity and constraint is just a key part of being comfortable working within that. There's always going to be things you have to do to help maintain the balance. We have to have creative problem solving and creative ideas for organizations to thrive and move forward. Yet at the same time, you're connected to other people, and there are constraints that come with that. You just can't do whatever you want. Your work group can't do whatever they want. You have public images to maintain with your customer base or your constituents out there, and we have to work within that framework, or things just fall apart, and that organizational evolution takes over, and the organization that can't hold it together with the right balance of constraints loses their market share or loses their effectiveness and is eventually out of the picture. All right, this was a long chapter. I have talked to you a long time, but there's no substitute for reading your book. Things are going to jump out at you that really connect with your problems you've been facing, and I have skipped them in this lecture because I can't talk about everything. But I've tried to provide for you a few stories and give you the important parts of this lengthy, complicated chapter to help you walk away from it grasping onto something. Thanks a lot for your patience and for listening to the long lecture, and we will talk to you in our next one.